Good evening, everybody. Calling the Public Art Commission meeting to order. Roll call. Commissioner Klaus.
Present.
Commissioner Taylor.
Present.
Commissioner Shen.
Present.
Commissioner Gordon, me, I'm here. Commissioner Miyagi, Commissioner Migdal, Commissioner Ross, absent. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
Great. Everyone received copies of the minutes from our regular meeting on July 18th. Hopefully you had a chance to review them. Are there any changes? Would anyone move to approve these minutes?
I move.
And I'll second.
Wonderful. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. And then we have a copy of the minutes from our retreat, our recent retreat on September 7th. Did anyone have any changes or comments to add to those minutes? Would anyone like to move to approve those minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes from Saturday, September 7th.
Thank you. Anyone second?
I second.
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Staff comments.
Staff comments are rather brief this evening. I'm going to pull up the Coverly. So our temporary project out at Coverly, the Coverly project, has been deinstalled. It was really successful, but it had reached the end of its time. So we're sad to see it go, but it was a big hit, so we might consider doing projects there in the future. And then the other announcement is the temporary project on King Plaza, Freeland Buck. There was an issue with a couple of the base plates that were not fabricated as approved, so we're waiting for those base plates to come back. You can see the foundations there in place. So we will hopefully be able to install that very shortly. We're shooting for next week, but we have to see how long it takes the fabricator to make the corrections. And that's it.
Thank you for those announcements. A quick question for you. Will there be any celebration around the Freeland Buck installation?
Well, we will sure celebrate once it is up.
Okay.
But what we're thinking about, because it's a photography-based artwork, is that perhaps in the month or the weeks following its installation, that we'll launch, maybe another Instagram contest or have some
Great.
sort of event then, like we did with the blue trees.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's go to our first action item and welcome Danielle Fox of Slate Art to talk about 565 Hamilton Avenue, a public artwork in private development.
So as you may recall, you all can come on up here. This is the final approval for the artwork at this location. Since the last time the Public Art Commission reviewed this project in October of 2018, they have received their architectural review board approval in July and their approval from the Director of Planning in August. So congratulations, they are moving forward with this project. As a reminder, the art construction or the art budget estimate was $124,000. And previously, you may remember, and they were going to walk you through some of this, they brought some examples of different types of sculpture they were considering at the site. The commission had voiced a preference for something that was more curvilinear or abstract figurative style of sculpture. And there was quite a bit of discussion about making sure that the artwork would stand out from the building. So whether that was use of materials or color, that was some of the discussion that took place the last time they were here. There was also an additional request that they explore the placement, if it was possible to pull the placement out on the corner, which is not feasible due to some of the complicated drainage and the setbacks required for the project. So I just wanted to give you just a quick reminder on some of those items. And with that, I will turn it over to our applicant team for their presentation.
Thank you. And
You can lead it.
Nadia, you'll move through it.
You don't
So,
have to hold it.
oh, I don't. Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Danielle Fox from Slate Art Consulting. And Brandy, maybe you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Brandy Bridges from Wilson Meany.
So, I don't want to bore everybody by reading through something that you've just read through, but I'm happy to deliver it in detail if it would be helpful. I'll just move through it, and we'll feel free to ask questions if I'm glossing over too much. So, and I don't believe that you two were at the last meeting, right? Okay. So, just for a refresher, our location is the corner of Hamilton and Webster. This is the place where the commercial business district gives way to a residential neighborhood, and the building function itself is expressing that transition because it's partly commercial on one side and residential on the other. So that's just kind of the context for the, yeah.
Is it replacing that yellow building? That's what I
Yes.
thought. Okay, so the previous slide, the yellow building is being replaced. Those are just architectural interests in the neighborhood, right?
Right,
across the way.
I was showing what was on all four
four
corners
corners.
of the intersection, and the yellow one is on the site where the new building will go.
Great, thank
Right.
you.
This is just a plan of the site with the star in the location that we've identified. You'll see in a moment, but this is under an open air pavilion. But you can see here the relationship to both of the streets. And here's an elevation showing it from the Hamilton Avenue perspective. So our proposal is to, and here you can see it both from the Hamilton and the Webster side. So this is a summary of what we brought last time. This had come out of conversations primarily with the architects about sort of, something that they, and, after looking at many sculptural styles, we sort of narrowed it down to this. There was agreement that it should be some kind of a brown or bronze finish, metal, and that it was going to have a certain kind of volume in terms of how it sat in the space. And I think you can see that's common to all of these. But we were still sort of going around and looked to the commission for feedback on whether, it should be something more blocky or more curvilinear or more abstract figurative. And the feedback that we got was not blocky because it was too much like the architecture, which is already very gridded and structured and had a lot of hard angles. There was a preference for curvilinear and also for the figurative. There was a concern that the brown color was going to match the building too much and kind of sink into the whole architectural scheme, and a request to make it stand out more. Also concern about it feeling approachable and accessible because it's not right in a public space. I mean, it is a private development, but so that was a concern both about, I think, physical access and also it just being visible to everybody. And it was suggested that we explore some other materials, and there was some conversation about, not so much a directive, but there was quite a bit of conversation about something that would be a little more fun, whimsical. There were references to bunny rabbits. So that's sort of what we took away. We discussed wood, but the ownership had concerns about long-term maintenance, being outdoors in the weather. We looked in ceramics, even June Kaneko, because I knew that is an artist that is favored here, but we just couldn't get the scale that we needed to fill that space in that material. Even if it, and from June Kaneko, we couldn't get it in the budget. But even other ceramic artists, it was going to be hard to get something with that kind of volume. So we sort of retreated back again towards metal, or although we didn't end up with metal, as you'll see. I brought a new deck to the architects and the developers to sort of start again. And Matt Gill was the artist that most people were the most interested in. And his work is both elegant and whimsical. He works in a whole panoply of different materials. We arranged a studio visit, and I brought Brandy and Joshua from Adlin Darling, who's the chief designer on the project. And what I thought that we were going to come out with was a metal sculpture sort of along the lines of the one on the left. But what they most liked was a piece, which you can see on the next slide, which was concrete over metal and had this very soft organic form. What we all liked about it was that it had the softness that I think we were looking for to contrast with the boxiness of the architecture. It had a really interesting kind of layering that made it complex and interesting to look at from different angles. We really enjoyed how it played with light and shadow, and how, as the sun and the light changes, different parts of it will kind of pop out and recede. And so you've got a kind of play going on there with that. You can see on the left, how the cavities, can be, when they're lit directly, as on the right, it sort of flattens out. But then when you get this light coming from different angles, it gains a lot of depth as well. There was a lot of interest in this surface, which had smooth passages and rough passages. It gave it a sense of kind of history and time. And it also had a kind of figurative or anthropomorphic quality. So it's not a picture of two human beings, but it reads as two figures that have some kind of a connection. And I read this one as kind of a parent and child. You've got the holding the little one. And Matt confirmed that he thinks of all the sculptures that he's done in this series as a kind of cast of characters, and that they sort of take on personalities to him as he's working on them. We then asked him to develop a design that would be more specific to this site, and he turned it into this, which he's titled 10 Rectangles. If the side on the right was actually, he presented as the A side, but I think most of us really liked the B side. But the beauty of that is that both sides are compelling and have fairly equal weight. And you can see that the figures have sort of grown up. It's no longer a parent and a child, but it's two figures that are connected. Maybe the larger one has an arm around the other one, or is just offering a kind of supportive gesture or context. And so we liked the sense of connection, a metaphor of collaboration and support. It could be read on a very more personal level as kind of families, but it can also just be people working together. This was one of the earlier drawings that Matt did. Over the course of the last month or two, we evolved the design a bit. One was to soften some of the outside lines, so it's a little less rectangular. And then the other was to take the little round bases off the bottoms of the two figures. So it now just hovers a few inches off the ground, and we're planning to put stone, like a really nice big stone gravel underneath it, to create a little space between it and the landscaping. It it has an inside armature, which extends down to a base that gets clamped to bolts, which the artist is going to provide to the contractor with a template. So he has the bolts that are going to be embedded in the footings, and then he just brings it, sets it down, and essentially screws it in. And then whatever of that is close to the surface will be covered up with the stones. So that's, but there is inside, there's a sheet of steel that you don't really see here because of the stones. The show and tell. He made him a cat. Now, this was before we decided to take the bases off. So, so here's our little friends. And I can pass it around if you want to take a closer look. So the bases no longer, it'll just, the ground will be at this level. Another thing I just want to note is that the sides, this is a sketch, so the side treatment won't actually be like this where there's sort of a flat edge that's gray. This is a little more true to what he's planning. So he'll build an armature out of steel. Then he builds the shape with extruded metal or expanded metal, which is kind of like a mesh. Along the outsides of all of the forms, he's going to put steel pipe, which he's going to slice open and then fit over the edges. Part of the reason he's slicing it open is because he wants it to be able to be quite large on the bottom and then get smaller, and to be able to have that gauge kind of expanding, swelling, and then pulling in. He needs to have the flexibility of the form. Stucco, which is essentially concrete, is going to be skimmed all over the surface, over the extruded metal, and he'll let just a little bit of the galvanized silver metal show through on the edges. And it's really just to give it a little bit of a linear accent. So that's what the gray is sort of representing here, albeit in a kind of sketched form. Let me just see if there's anything. Yeah, hey, once all the metal is put together, he sends it out for galvanizing. So it'll be, he calls it hot dip, but that will make it resistant to any kind of rust or degradation. It can sometimes powder a little white, if anything, but that will, he says there's some control over that, depending on what kind of chemicals you use, and that will also sort of fade into the light color of the stucco that we've selected. The stucco or the concrete finish will have the pigment mixed in with it from the beginning. So there's, so there's not going to be paint on the outside that'll flake off, or have to be replaced. The color will be all the way through the piece. He's planning on spraying it with a silicone space sealer, which is similar, if you can imagine, to what is on the grout in your shower. So it resists water, but you don't really see it at all. And so that should help it be able to, if environmental pollutants built up a little grime or something from it being near the street over time, it could be washed off. The surface on that does approximate what we're looking for, where you'll see some areas are kind of burnished and a little smooth, and then other areas are left a little more rough. We felt like that just gave it more interest and more character. And we actually looked at several different tones and shades for the piece. He gave us a whole box of palette. And at first we had thought something darker, but in the end, we all felt that the light popped off that's going to be board formed concrete in the back. And that back wall will have light coming in sometimes, but a lot of time it will also be in shadow. So we liked how the white felt like it was going to pick up the light from the Hamilton side for sure. And it doesn't look like any of the materials that are in the palette for the building itself. So it felt very distinct from the building. And that was the other reason. It's actually just, it's not a pure white. It's a little warm and a little gray. Maybe. Yeah, I think you'll see. Why don't we move on, Nadia? Thank you. So this was just thinking about scale. We scaled it up a little bit from our sort of original specs as well, so that it would be relatable to a human scale, but still be a little bigger, so that it had that imposing presence to be able to catch attention, viewers' attentions as they're moving up and down the street. So it's a little larger than life. And then we've planned, what's not shown in here is that there's going to be some lighting in the ceiling that's just sort of standard placement to light up that whole porch pavilion area. But we're also planning recessed lights shining up from the ground, 4 of them, 2 in front and 2 on the other side, that'll illuminate it at night. And that just shows the locations of the uplights. They'll be angled, but they'll be flush to the ground. And then another design change that's happened since we last presented to you is that this ramp, ADA ramp, has been added to the front of the building, which is actually quite wonderful because it creates a path from Hamilton. Not only Webster has the stairs, but it creates an access point from Hamilton so that the piece doesn't feel as shut off, and it's a little more inviting, I think, from both sides to be accessed. And then if you go to the next slide, you can, all right, so here's sort of looking at it from the Webster Street side. And then this is it's got the old sculpture in the rendering, but it shows the ramp. And where the blue square is where we thought we'd put the identification plaque. So it'll be very clear at that point of access, that it is a public artwork. The rest is really just Matt's. I think the packet you have has his entire CV, but you'll see he's been working as a sculptor for over 40 years. He's been in gallery exhibitions for 40 years, and he's completed, as you can see from this list, many, many very large-scale commissions. So we feel completely confident in his ability to do this and do it to scale and do it to our expectations. Timeline hasn't really changed. We're hoping that Wilson Mini can submit for a permit in November, and that process will complete sometime this winter. We're going to wait until the middle of next year to have Matt start on the sculpture, but we are going to have him actually make it in advance of the building being finished, just because I don't like huge gaps between selecting an artist and having the piece made, because too many other things can happen. So Wilson Meany is offered to store it if he can't until they're ready to install it, which will be in 2021. And this is the same budget we presented before. The sculpture itself is 73 and change. He may actually help us with crating and delivery, and then we can give him a little more for that as well. So, any questions?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
It's not my responsibility to be an art critic, here, but it's beautiful.
Oh,
And
good.
it looks like it's going to be beautiful. I just had two questions. One is just sort of thinking about the building and its space and wondering, it's probably a question for Wilson Meany, but is it still this sort of mix, are those numbers right? Like 19 rental apartments and then mixed use and,
Yes,
And-
that's correct.
which leads to my second question, which is about feeling like you have accessibility. And I love the idea that the accessibility is now more accessible. But of course, like when you're walking by, you still don't know if you can approach an apartment building / mixed use space. And so that the plaque, certain wording can make clear that you should be free to come look at it, and certain wording can be ambiguous. I'm curious about the process.
I
for
think
the sort of
there's wording that's
It's
pretty
standard.
standardized, right, Elise?
We have standardized wording on the plaque that says it's part of the City of Palo
Yeah, it's
Alto
that wording?
Public Art and Private Development Program. And it would be attached on our online maps and
recording.
advertised so that people know that they can approach it.
Thank you for responding to the comments that were made at the previous meeting and really taking into consideration the commission's suggestions and concerns. I really do agree with you. The piece is going to kind of glow because of the color you've chosen. And I like the materials that you've chosen as well. I wasn't at the previous meeting, but after reading the notes, I tend to agree with getting away from using the same materials that the building is made of. And this is a great creation, and it seems like you guys have done a lot of work, so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, any comments?
So I have to say, I keep thinking, I like the concept. I have to say, I feel like I would like to see a little bit more color, a little bit more. I think it's still a little too safe now. That's just my only, I like the idea and I like the whimsy of it, but just seeing what he's capable of, I think this is a little safe, and it's a little, I would love like a little color or a little bit more oomph. I still feel like it fits a little too into the building still. It's better, but I do agree that you did listen to our suggestions, and that's always a nice feeling. But that would be my only thing. I mean, looking at his samples, the color that he adds to some of them, I mean, it does, like, it pops and
Right.
it makes it exciting, and I really,
I'll just the
that's my
only
only
comment
feeling about it.
back to that those colored pieces, which I agree are magnificent, are usually in big open spaces with like a lot of space around where they're just what's happening, and they're not having to really engage with architecture or with a very specific location in the same way that this one is. So.
Really appreciate your putting our inputs into this work, and it looks stunning. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And also, I think like just in terms of the color balance, because of the sort of the color scheme, and the fact that this is not part of the color scheme, but it complements, and then put that in the context of the landscaping, I think it will just be both very harmonic as well as sort of independent.
Mm-hmm. And the landscaping will also add some color. It won't be in the art, but I think you're looking at also a black and white printout. So imagine a little more life in the context there. Yeah, and I think, he'll just be a great addition to the collection in Palo Alto. He's a really great sculptor sitting right here in San Francisco who you haven't had an opportunity to add yet. So I think that's exciting.
Is anyone interested in making a motion to approve this project, Public Art and Private Development at 565 Hamilton Avenue?
I move.
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you so much for presenting, and clearly you put a lot of thought into this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon?
Yeah.
I love that.
Hopefully, sculptures of two guys going surfing.
Yeah. Everyone will see what they want to see in it. But I think,
Use the microphones, please.
Yep.
Is that the final design? Wait, so just, and I'm just looking again at the illustration, and then this maquette. So which one is? Because there's a little bit of a difference in terms of
right, yeah.
some of the-
So this was made before that last sketch was. And in the last sketch, you see that the bases are gone and that the exterior forms are more curved and rounded.
Could you
So
pull up the sketch for a second, Nadia, if you don't?
yeah, keep going. Yeah, yeah.
But only, because I was just saying the.
Oh no, that was the early one. So it's, yep, the next.
It's the one in the rendered view.
Yeah,
the
it's
best
the
place
one
to look
without
at
the pedestals on the bottom, so there.
So,
So there you see
okay,
the-
that's fine, yeah.
the forms have become rounder.
So there's a little different, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they have.
That's when it was still like
Yeah.
the parent and the child?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's also the version that you saw in the rendered view within the building frame.
So cool.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I've become developed very affectionate feelings like this. People I've been hanging out with. And I think people in your community are too as well.
Yeah.
Moving ahead to the next action item, California Avenue Public Art Plan and the allocation of funds in the amount of $15,000 for a consultant to create this plan. We talked about this at the retreat, so any comments about it?
Yes, thank you. The retreat, there was quite a bit of discussion about the California Avenue District. And I've been using as a working definition for the California Avenue District, Cambridge, El Camino, Alma, and Oregon. To border. Okay, everyone have it now?
Yes.
El Camino to, basically to the train, and then Oregon
And, okay, got it,
to Cambridge.
got it.
Everyone's on board?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes it takes a minute to get the streets.
Beyond Cambridge, though, there's also quite a bit of commercial activities beyond Cambridge, isn't there?
Well, I mean, we could look it up. Cambridge sort of is it really transfers more into houses there. So that was what I was using as a working definition. In the course of this discussion, of course, I am seeking input as to whether there are other things we ought to consider. But using those parameters as sort of the working definition of the CalAV district, but there is a lot of private development taking place there. Of course, we have some big muni projects happening there between the garage and the public safety building that are upcoming. There's lots of transportation. There's lots of discussion about what's happening all along that sort of El Camino corridor. The input and feedback we've gotten quite a bit in discussions with the CalAV merchants is that they're very interested in having more art on CalAV and in that district, whether it's temporary or permanent. And so we really feel like it would be beneficial to have an outside consultant come in, like we did with our overall public art master plan, to really conduct the interviews, look at the traffic patterns, look at the upcoming developments, all of that, heavy traffic that's now happening up and down Park Boulevard. There are so many pedestrians coming on and off of trains and going to businesses there, and really engaging them in discussions about what kind of temporary and permanent projects we should be considering doing, and put together a plan. for us. So in discussions with a few of my colleagues, we put up to $15,000 as sort of a benchmark. That would include some really extensive community meetings and outreach interviews with key stakeholders. Of course, it takes a lot of up close, work with staff for them to get all the information that they need about understanding transportation, what kind of developments are happening there, what companies are moving in and out, who are the, longstanding stakeholders there, and of course the residents in the community who live right there. It's not all just commuters. This is, as I've heard some members of that community discuss it, this is Palo Alto's downtown, where university is more of a global downtown. So, it really deserves a very special treatment in the same way that the Embarcadero Road corridor, when we put together a different plan for that corridor is. So that's where some of the discussion came from. It is an item that is called out as a priority on our public art master plan, and was, again, something that was discussed at the retreat. So with that, I'm open for any questions or discussion.
When you say allocation of funds, where do we draw for this 15,000? What funds do we take from?
I believe we were looking at taking these from the CIP funds that were derived from California Avenue District projects.
Oh, well, that's great.
How long do you think this is gonna take?
Well, honestly, we'll need to have a call that will be open for a month. It'll probably be January before we have a consultant on board. And I estimate it will probably take up to 6 months to do, to have the appropriate level of outreach, and it depends on the availability of that consultant, how much time they can dedicate to this particular project intensively.
Are we gonna be talking to the consultants that work on the Palo Alto master plan?
They will certainly be invited to compete for this, should they be interested. Yep.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe they already have some familiarity with Palo Alto, and this is, a sub part of it, but.
That's absolutely accurate. Yep, thank you.
Would someone like to make a motion to allocate these funds?
Sure, I'm gonna make a motion to allocate funds of 15,000 for the California Avenue Public Art Plan.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great,
On our
thank you.
third action item, adoption of priorities for the coming year, we're all familiar with what we discussed at the retreat. They were outlined in the minutes that we approved earlier, and we talked about them during the meeting with the council that we had. Was that just last week? I think it was, last Monday. We know what I believe it's 4 priorities, is that correct? Okay, and we can discuss them further if you'd like, or adopt them as is. I have them somewhere. Expanding story into other permanent and temporary artworks. Producing Code Art 2, and it's expanding programming in 2020. October 2020. We knew that was a real priority for staff, and it is for the commission as well. Creating a master plan for Cal Ave pedestrian corridor, and identify priorities and process for future use of in lieu funds, which we talked about as well. So those are the 4 priorities. Does anyone have any questions? Ian, you were not at the retreat, so you maybe the 4th one. We have some in lieu funds, and we're trying to figure out, well, the in lieu funds have accumulated to the amount of over $1 million, I believe, correct?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So, right. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting, that'll be an interesting project. And I believe Commissioner Ross and Mia Taylor are going to get together and, Chairman Ben Miyaji as well, okay, to help the commission identify priorities and process, correct? So, any questions or discussion? Okay. Then I move that we adopt the priorities for the coming year that were created at our annual retreat. Does anyone second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now we're moving on to non-action items, temporary public art on Cal Ave Garage construction fence. I'm excited for California artists. What have we got on those? Anything new from those 4 artists?
So tonight what we have for you is, these are not final artworks. This is a sneak peek and digital sketches, so don't get too attached, but this is the design direction. We did have a selection panel. Well, let me just walk back for a second. So, as you know, the Cal Ave Garage has some large construction barricades around it, which are aesthetically challenged. This is not going to solve all of that, but may help ease some of the heartburn. Additionally, there's some discussion about those blue plywood panels being a real target for vandalism and people posting posters and whatnot. So, so we went into our pre-qualified pool and did a limited solicitation as well to California-based artists, since this is California Avenue. And we had a selection panel with artist James Moore from our collection, Jessica Roth, who is one of the owners of the Cobblery on Cal Ave, Matt Raschke from Public Works, who is overseeing both of those huge construction projects and knows a lot about that community. Commissioner Taylor was part of that, and I was part of the team. So Nadia facilitated the selection panel, and we had some great artists to choose from. So, so here you see there are, of course, 4 sides around the site. The shortest potential wall being about 100 feet. The longest on Jacaranda, if you recall, Jacaranda is behind like the Starbucks alley where we've got the triptych of murals that are on what used to be the Bishop Building. And so that is the only wall that people could walk next to, although cars do go through there. So it's not like it's a pedestrian safe zone, but that's the only wall that's really approachable. The sidewalk on Ash, Sherman, and Birch are all covered by these barricades. So there's no way to walk right by them. It's drive aisle. So a lot of the discussion on the panel was choosing artists that the artwork could be readable from across the street. And not being, depending on the side it's facing, not being too distracting to drivers, but being of interest, primarily viewed either from a vehicle or from across the street. And so the selection panel came up with 4 really terrific artists, Samuel Price, Allison Kumoth, Philip Hua, and Ori Original. And so we'll start with the first one. This is Sam Price, who is actually doing a workshop coming up at the Palo Alto Art Center to show people how to do collage portraits of their dogs. So,
And it is sold out.
is it?
Commissioner Taylor sent me the link, and I tried to get in, sold out.
Microphone.
Okay.
So, so there will be a series, I believe, of 16 dogs, and then it will repeat. And the idea that because this was the artist who creates work that is probably people will desire approaching the most, that's going to go along Jacaranda. And that side will also have a couple of holes drilled in different areas so people can peek in on the construction site. So that site is intended by Public Works as well to be a little more pedestrian friendly and approachable. And we think that of any of these projects, this is probably the one that people might want to take selfies with. So we put it on the most pedestrian safe side. Yes.
So, are the subjects already chosen?
Yes.
How do we know?
That's Buddy in slide 4.
Yeah, whatever.
So this, so the next artist will show you Alison Kuma. And so some of the feedback from the panel was a preference for some of this more linear work and a lot of work with hands. And so she's created something that would go along the Sherman Avenue side, which faces the Visa building. And we also wanted to be very conscious of the fact that the people who work in that building, a couple of the artworks are much louder, and so that might be a little much for them. And especially since that is quite a long wall, it's a 200, that one's like 230 feet, yeah. So, so she is working with this, is her working digital sketch right now, is the direction she's going. And then the next artist, which would be on Birch, so facing what will be the public safety building. So right now that is a big open parking lot. So this is Philip Hua, and this is a sample of his previous work. So we do not have a sketch yet, but he is also working on using birds and some of the landscape that you see when you're facing that way going up toward Woodside. And so having a little element of landscape and birds, but we don't have anything to show you yet. So this is probably the closest to what the final work will be. And then do you have a question?
Just a question
Yes.
about that one, yeah.
Sure.
I'm thinking about Wegner.
Oh, yeah.
Peter.
Peter.
And has Philip Hua had the opportunity to understand what Wegner's going to be putting up, like as a sort of, I know they won't be up at the same time, of
Right.
course, but the idea of a sort of lead or hints or continuity.
No, because this will be long gone before.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the people who walk by will walk by now and then.
Right.
So even if one piece is gone and then a new piece comes, the idea of there being some, and this is the folks who are on the selection committee, obviously, but it would seem to me that sharing with him what's going to come afterwards in a very similar space. In fact, looking at where his piece was and knowing that people who walk that path will have this follow-on sort of art.
It's interesting. No, they were really just given this site. And some of the feedback that was given from the panel about what they most responded to about their previous work, to use that as inspiration for what they're creating for this site. And then the last artist is Ori Original. So this is a sample of his previous work. This is not what he's proposing, but he will be taking the wall on Ash Street, which, yes, it looks like a short wall, but it's over 100 feet long. I mean, it's a pretty big wall. So, but clearly his work is much more dynamic and colorful and playful, and so we thought that wall might be most appropriate. So those are the 4 artists that were selected by the panel, and the design direction, at least on 2 of them. Commissioner Taylor, did you want to say anything else from being on the panel about the artists or anything?
Not much. I guess I could say that I think we liked, it was a really strong panel in general of artists, and that we were really trying to kind of just think of outside the box and what would be different, because we saw a lot of things that we really liked, but that were we've seen it before. So we're just kind of thinking about, well, what are things that would capture people's attention, exciting, and also just, I think it's temporary, but yet it is, you want it to be momentous, sorry, to be closer, momentous. So I think, I'm excited to see how this lasts, and I think it will be interesting to see if this is something in the future, because I know we've talked about doing stuff like this for other projects, so, yeah.
So I have a question. It being that these are temporary, what's gonna happen after it's done? Like, let's say if the artwork remains in fairly good condition after the exhibition period.
Well, the artwork is printed on a vinyl, and so probably after a year, it won't look so great. It will be susceptible to, over the course of construction, they have to move and shift those panels quite a bit. They'll sun fade. So part of this is a pilot to see how it holds up. Do these panels start to peel over time? Do they hold up or not? Interestingly enough, one of the panelists, Jessica Roth, said, well, if they hold up well and the vinyl's coming down, that she might know of people who might be interested in making some goods out of those. So we'll certainly keep in touch with her, and if there are any other artists who, might think about ways to reuse portions, we would of course have to get the permission of these artists for that kind of adaptive use. But we're open to whatever. But our guess is that after a year on that construction fence, they're probably not going to be as pristine.
Thank you. That is really exciting, and it's fun to have 4 different artists. So thank you to the panel for your vision on this. The last non-action item is council joint meeting discussion. We were all there last Monday to present to the city council, and I think it went pretty well, but I would love to hear everyone's feedback on that. So if anyone has comments, I look forward to them.
Well, I thought it was very interactive. We got a lot of really good questions. After the meeting, we had a little brainstorm session, and I thought, maybe one of the suggestions I had was if we can have perhaps a library of a photo library of the artwork that we can show during the meeting, during the Q&A sessions, because sometimes the city council members are responding to their constituents' questions about a particular piece of artwork, and then that piece of artwork becomes the subject of discussion. And I noticed that there were some attendees at the meeting, and they just had no idea what was being discussed. So it could potentially be helpful if we can show a picture of the artwork at issue or under discussion outside of, beyond our presentation topic. That may make it a more engaging experience for the folks that were attending the joint session.
Just a quick note in the experience of having briefly presented and then some of the following conversation, which is that I'd just like to thank you, Elise, and obviously Nadia too, for sort of expertise and depth of knowledge that you brought to the session, because there were some things that we could not answer, but never did I feel anxious about whether or not we would have one. Exactly. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No problem. It's it's kind of a funny meeting because it's the commissioners' meeting, but there is this division between, what's the commissioner's purview and what's staff purview, and it seemed like a lot of the questions they had were more logistics about the implementation. So we're always there for that, no problem.
Seem very interested and engaged. It's a nice time, it's great to go through what we're doing once a year with the city council, so it's quite nice that they give us that time to review what we're up to, so it's good.
I thought, this was my second meeting, and I thought the first time was not nearly as interactive or as in-depth or as long. I don't remember the first time getting so many questions.
I believe part of that might be because there are a number of new council members. So some of the council members that were on the last time we did the presentation were very well versed in public art. They had been our liaisons, had come to the meetings, or had been deeply involved in the development and approval of public art and private development. So I think that may be some of it, is that some of the council members are just less familiar with the public art program and with the commission.
Since I wasn't there, were there certain things that they would like us to expand on, or that they think we should
One
spend less
interesting
time on, or?
You know, one interesting thing, Nia, because you have been in the past, we did not hear anything about the Greg Brown murals. And so that was really interesting because each year that's always come up. But they did talk about, I can't remember the title of the piece, the koi swimming in the crosswalks.
Go with the flow.
Go with the flow. And so that was kind of interesting. They asked some good questions about why would you have a colorful artwork in the middle of a road when kids are crossing there. And, you know, we think of it as, oh, wow, it's drawing attention to the crosswalk so people will know that there's a crosswalk there, but they're looking at it at a different angle. And also of the wear and tear, how that artwork is holding up. So that was kind of interesting as well. Other things that were brought up, I'm trying to remember. The bridge, when that is the artwork being prepared for the pedestrian bridge that's going to take place. That was kind of interesting that was on their radar as well.
There were a couple of comments very positive about Code Art 2.
Yeah.
And
Very
excitement about
positive,
doing
yeah.
that. So that was something that really came home. Just to follow up on the comment, because it was one thing that Councilmember Cormack had brought up about go with the flow, and then the press picked it up. We did actually, go back to transportation because those locations were all identified in partnership with transportation to find the safest opportunities for that. Creative crosswalks, of course, have been done all across the country. And we did check the transportation records. There have been no incidents having to do with the crosswalks in that location. So I just want to clarify that for everybody.
And
I didn't realize I stepped in a crosswalk issue by bringing that up, but I'll go back in the paper and read that article.
And actually picking up on that point, I noticed that there were two council members. One basically was like reading a comment like, "Oh, who thought it was a good idea to?" Right, and then the other was when we were presenting the Charleston Aristodale corridor, the wheels, and they were like, "Well, is this going to be a concern for wayfinding?" And I thought both comments really had to do with safety.
Absolutely.
And wayfinding, and I believe in both those projects when we were looking at them, we did actually discuss. Was it helpful, from the perspective of wayfinding? Did it draw attention? Did it help direct traffic? Was it going to enhance safety? So I thought my takeaway from both those discussion points was, we should make sure that we continue to highlight those issues when we are identifying or reviewing projects in those contexts.
And that's an excellent point, and I believe, the same way that this commission brings that up and asks all those questions, which staff, we work with everyone else and think we've dotted all the i's and crossed the t's, but that is, a charge of the commission to ask all those same questions, and the same way that council is doing. So, they're responding to comments that they've heard and want to show that they're proactive in asking the same questions.
Thank you. It's interesting with the Greg Brown murals. I think it's a lot to say about just the changing demographics in this area, especially with the city council as well. But that I don't want to use the word new leaf, but it is in a way of new leaves that are coming. And I think it's interesting because I was thinking about the history museum, and I don't know if it's something if they've talked about. The Greg Brown murals, but it's something that I think we need to, kind of think about, kind of some of these pieces, because eventually the building, I think isn't the U.S. Postal Service building, it can't get torn down, right, because it's a historical building, but they were gonna do some stuff with it, I think, at one point, I thought, so.
It was for sale. My understanding is that the city was under negotiations at one point to purchase it, and that did not go through. So I do not have any insight as to what the future of that building is.
But we do have photographs and vinyls of a lot of those Greg Brown murals, and that history museum is it's underway now because they have their funding. They did bring that up, and the frescoes that are on the exterior of that building as well. So they had a lot of interesting comments and questions, and a lot of positive things too. Even brought up the benches on University Avenue. So it was really a positive meeting. So thank you. Any announcements?
It's not an announcement, so, but, I'd like to, if I can, very quickly, to sort of start a conversation, follow up on my question, earlier. And I thought that the 565 Hamilton presentation doesn't suffer from what is behind, the thinking behind my question. Because clearly when they gave thought to accessibility and they gave thought to lighting, I mean, it's really, they're doing everything that could be asked of them and more. But you mentioned the development of public art and private development at the council. And some turnover in council members since then. And so this is about the question of the plaque. Clearly public art and private development is always going to be imperfect in certain ways. But we've had a couple presentations where we've come back over and over again to the question of how really accessible to the public is this piece of art, and thinking particularly of some of the stuff that's going on like Page Mill. And so in a hotel in El Camino maybe. And I would be curious to know what the process would be for not having language that said both public and private in the description of what it is. This is part of the public arts program, but this is done in public arts for private development. I mean, that does have a little ambiguity to it. If I was nervous about trespassing and saw something that said it's a private development, but it's public art, what do it? And it's not to bring into question how that was developed, because I think it's a tremendous program for the city. But I wonder what it would look like to make it less ambiguous on a plaque. Not what the wording would be, but what the process would be
Process for changing the wording
on those plaques.
on those plaques. Well, that's interesting. I mean, the language was developed as public art and private development for that it's part of a city program. So, like, do you have any thoughts on?
Well, I mean, if
on
it just
what
said
kind of
this is public art, this is part of public art and private development, come see me. I mean,
Well-
that's not the actual language,
Right.
And again, we don't have to discuss what the language would look like, or even if the language right now is good. I'm just curious: would it require a bunch of action by the council? Would it require what would?
Well, not necessarily the council, but we would need to consult pretty closely with legal about that. We do, as we go through these projects with developers, the litmus test is that it has to be available to the public 40 hours a week. So someone cannot be limited to approach the artwork. And we do try and make sure that that's available on our website. So if anyone wanted to look up, what are the public art and private development? Right now there are only a few, but hopefully there will be a great collection later, so that people could make a tour like that. But you raise a good point about, some of these projects, it could be intimidating for people to walk up to them.
Well, I
But
will
it's-
say, this particular piece today, I made the comment about that I think they still played it a little too safe, and I think they did it because they did not want people, and I could be wrong, but my feeling is that they don't want people going onto their property. If you're gonna, when you make things more colorful and attractive, people are more likely to go up to it. And it's interesting, and I'm moving back, sorry. But the other pieces on Sand Hill, it's the same thing that, I think they're really, I haven't seen them yet in person, but, the fact that, could go somewhere, but then there's security that could say, hey, you can't be here, you need to move away, it's intimidating. And so I think it's something that, as a commission, I think we can push a little bit and encourage them. I mean, I like I said, this piece, I think whimsical and fun, but I think they kept it safe because they don't want people to go up to it. That's just I think if it was out a little bit more towards the street, I think that would be more exciting for people if they walk by and they can be like this close to it, rather than, it's one thing to put it like you can put it still in a nice green space, so it's like they're not walking all the way up to it per se, but like it's close enough. But that's just my 2 cents.
Those are great comments. And I was thinking, could you put a QR, the code on it, so then it pops up and says, public art and private places, this is available, please enjoy.
I think we could find a way to do that. I think we would probably have to sort of negotiate per owner if we could have the physical QR code there, but I think we could still have it show up in story as people look up adjacent pieces, and it would come up as part of the collection. So I think there are other ways we could talk about making them more accessible and having them pop up.
Hey, Elise, I'm just flipping through this handy dandy binder on the private development section, and it talks about in the final review section, it does talk about an identification plaque, but I don't see, maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but I don't see specific detail about what the identification plaque should say, how far it needs to be from the artwork or anything like that. But it may be good to have a little bit of that type of reference for the applicants as well, because that's what it says in the final review checklist for the applicants.
And we have the template panel that we give to them upon approval. And so they do have an optional line if they want to name the company as the sponsor or not. But it does have to have public art and private development as part of the city of Palo Alto.
Okay, well, thank you.
Just really, Nia, your points are, I can hear Ben and Jim in our ears saying we're talking too much. No, your point's a really good one, and I don't mean to impugn anything upon the previous folks who have presented under this program to us. But if you assume that there is sometimes an uncomfortability with outsiders coming into spaces, I mean, we're talking about apartments too, 19 of them in this case, it would seem to me that the commission could take the position, or some of us in it could all of a sudden develop an inkling to try to find ways to make things more accessible. One way to do that is through design, is I guess your point, the piece itself. Another way to do it, clearly, Lauren, to me, seems to me technology. If there are technological solutions, I mean, but then I mean, this what exactly the wording is, and whether the template is written in stone, so to speak, or whether we could make it what the process would look like. I would be interested in having further conversations about things that we can do as a commission to make the public art that's in private development program, I mean, it's successful and it's going to be successful, so I don't mean to change it radically, but just this question of accessibility and minor tweaks that we can make to do it.
So I think that's an excellent point. I do want to be mindful of not getting into a whole other discussion item that's not on the agenda tonight, but we would be happy to agendize that for a future meeting if we want to have a more in-depth discussion about this idea of accessibility in private development projects.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other announcements before we talk about our next meeting, which is October 17th, I believe. Yes, Thursday, October 17th.
There is a really fun, exciting opening happening at the Palo Alto Arts Center tomorrow night from 7 to 9. Wear something animal related.
I saw some big dogs.
There will be live animals. There will be skulls. There is some crazy artwork all about humans and their relationships to animals. And there will be people in full furry costumes, from what I've heard. You can't bring dogs in, but service
come
animals
enjoy.
only. But it is going to be a really fun party. So I encourage you all to come. You might want to bring a bicycle because the parking's very limited, but it will be a really fun party, and there will be hedgehogs and blue-tongued skinks and really amazing artwork and fun activities and a cash bar, compliments of the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation.
Wonderful.
No, not with me, but I could send you a link.
Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.